Thank you so much, President Robinson and Secretary Bond, for joining us today. This was truly inspirational for me, and I'm very honored and privileged to be up here on the stage with you. And I also have the privilege of asking you a couple of questions to get us started, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you for those comments. I thought you as the elders and as global leaders are doing your part in education and encouraging multilateral international organizations. But when we, as both of you have mentioned, some of the climate changes, the climate events that are happening are daunting. Mozambique to Haiti, Bahamas, Australia, the floodings in Houston and the Midwestern states, the erosion of the permafrost in Alaska, all of those things seem to be happening with more frequency, with more devastation, with hundreds of billions of dollars in damage. And so all of that seems very daunting. How do we absorb all of this crisis? And I think what we have in the audience is that the audience members are also asking for, how do we deal with this? So you mentioned BlackRock, you mentioned Microsoft. These are big companies. Saudi Arabia can also do something as a government. The Trump administration can obviously make a political commitment. But I also wonder, as you talk about the top down and bottom up, what can we do in addition to supporting and educating ourselves on a micro level? And how does the bottom up and the top down meet? And I wonder, President Robinson, if you might address that.
Well, I like to say to people what they can do, which is 3 steps. And the first step is to make climate change, the climate crisis, I don't even talk about climate change anymore, the climate crisis, the climate emergency, personal in your own life. You've got to do that, which means you've got to do something you weren't doing before. And I give the example, I've become a pescatarian. I've given up meat about 1.5 years ago. I still have withdrawal from time, but anyway. The second step is to get angry and get active. Get angry about those with more responsibility who aren't meeting their responsibility, and get active supporting those who are on the right side of this, on conservation, on advocacy, on all the things that can be done. And the third thing, and actually this is the most important, we have to imagine this world that we need to be hurrying towards. Because, as we've heard, we've both been saying this, we have 10 years. You know, we have to be in a much different place. We have to have 45% reduction in global emissions by 2030. That's a very short time. So that's why Greta Thunberg is so frustrated in Davos. She says there's lots of talk, but there's no action. We're not seeing that bend the curve. But in order to get a sense of enthusiasm about it, we have to imagine this world. It'll be a much healthier world. We won't have the particle problem that Ban Ki-moon was talking about. We won't have that, the fossil fuel air and water pollution. We have to have a much more equal world because we'll have to have implemented the Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind. And with the gender equality, goal 10 on equality between countries and within countries and so on, and oceans and all of those things, and biodiversity. So, I think we really need young people to think about that world they want to see and pressure us to get there more quickly.
And I think what comes through in both of your comments today is that, yes, there is a crisis. And Secretary General Bond, you mentioned that we talk a lot about mitigation, and that's the sense of crisis, and that we have to try to stop things from happening. But you also talked about adaptation, which brings us to from a narrative of crisis to a narrative of opportunity in climate change. Will you talk more about sustainable development and how that is an opportunity for all of us?
If we are able to meet the target of all Agenda 2030, I think that will be fine. But the implementation level, depending upon where you are living, is quite different. Likewise, in the addressing the climate actions is again hugely different. The countries with the resources, I think they are doing all, trying to transition from fossil fuel energy to sustainable energy, etc. But there are many poor countries, as you mentioned, Africa and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and South Pacific developing, small developing island states. They simply don't have any resources. That's why the US and European Union and Japan, at the time of negotiation, they pledged that from this year, up to this year, 2020, they will mobilize $100 billion every year. Then thereafter, $100 billion every year to support developing countries financially. But this Green Climate Fund is almost an empty shell now because of non-implementation of their promises, starting from the United States. United States is not paying, at least 1/3 is lacking. The European Union is not following, Japan is not following. So OECD is not following. And then it has just merely few $billion. That's the reality. Then we must use all high technology, 21st century technology to address climate phenomena. And we have to really mobilize the power of business community, global business communities, which can really take a much more important contribution, much more than the government can do. They have to really show their global responsibility as a global corporations. That's what I am asking. But there is a clearly lack of united will of the international community. Now, when United States is away out of this, then we are missing huge pillar. Now, who is leading this? U.S. has been leading. Then when U.S. is not there, then who can expect to lead this one? Do you expect China will lead this one? Or European Union is also divided. So that's why I am very much worried that the things are not moving as has been promised. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there should be a political leadership now.
Both of you talked about unity, political leadership, collective action, and having a common goal and being very focused on this. But as you know, the Trump administration's approach is America first. And we have a rise of populism and authoritarianism in Europe and in all parts of the world. And I wonder, how do we get to that point, given this trend and the rise of authoritarianism? I'm talking about, for example, the Amazon is burning, and the Amazon is being depleted at an alarming rate. And yet, when the global community said something about it, the pushback was severe. That this is our country. We're a sovereign nation. We can do what we want. And so when we talk about global unity, how do we deal with that in the age of America first, or in the age of authoritarianism, or in the rise of populism and entrenched interests that are hard to move?
It's certainly true that we are in a difficult time of undermining multilateral cooperation. And the elders actually made a strong statement last December, and we called out the United States as being probably the worst offender, if you like, in that regard. But there are other countries as well, and you mentioned the Amazon, and we know that Brazil is part of that. But actually, I think we can learn a lesson from the way young people are organizing with their Fridays for Future. I have been incredibly impressed. I was moderating a panel in Madrid in which I had 5 young people, and I mean 14, 15, 16, 17, and 5 government ministers who were on the right side of the issues. They had committed to a declaration on the importance of remembering children in particular with the Sustainable Development Goals. And the children were asking questions of the ministers, and then the ministers could ask of the children. And at one point, a 14-year-old from Norway had asked a question, and clearly she wasn't satisfied with the answer. And I said, "Do you want to come back?" And then it just took off. And what those children said, I will never forget. They said, we are bonded by the fact that all over the world, we know we don't have a future unless things change. And that has made us have a huge solidarity and even love for those who are most affected in our world. It was, it was just, it was like listening to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals by the young people who are aware of this bond between them. And that's what's happening. And that's what's happening. That's what, the marches in Davos, because Greta Thunberg was there with her leadership of, there are various names. She's not the only one, and she keeps trying to get away from just mentioning her. But the point is, they get it. And they say, as I said, listen to the science. And they have understood the science. It's not hard for them to understand it. It's accessible to them. And the science is frightening at that age, unless you do something. So I think there's an opportunity in the very climate crisis. I think there's an opportunity because actually we don't have any choice. And it's manifesting itself. When a first world country like Australia is burning, and then when the rains come, the dust in the rivers kills the fish, and it's worse and worse and worse.
Let me add to multilateralism. Again, another deepest worrying situation is that the multilateralism represented by the United Nations is now under serious attack by those countries, including the United States, which have been really most supported and in their global leadership based on universal values and principles on human rights and peace and security, equality. I think the United States has been just respected as a leader of this world. And multilateralism has been respected. Multilateralism, particularly since the end of Second World War, has been the guiding framework, global framework, under which and within which countries big and small, people rich and poor, have been protected and supported with a due respect, sovereignty, etc. Now, you talk about America first, my country first, protectionism, individualism, isolationist. Look at what had happened in 1930s when US took isolationist policies. It has led to the collapse of League of Nations, that it has led the surge of Nazism and fascism. Then Second World War broke out. There was no peacekeeping or stability, no force. Now, only with having experienced such a tragic consequences during Second World War, people came to realize that we have to work together, big and small. And US has been, by any standard, without any questions, has been playing a leadership role. And people accepted it. Now the US has been withdrawing from, most importantly, Human Rights Council, then UNESCO, then they have abrogated the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. They have withdrawn from the biggest and most important global agreement on climate change. And what kind of lessons are we going to learn from this? The people say that children learn from their parents. When parents give good lessons by their own behavior, you don't need to teach. By just acting, mother and father, by acting, the children learn. And people learn from the global leaders. When global leaders are not acting responsibly, then you will see a lot of divisions, and isolationist policies. And then you will see unwanted situation, like ISIS or extremist forces. So this world is now experiencing continuing sources of conflict here and there. And therefore, I think we have to really work together. The global leaders should show global vision based on global citizenship. There is no such United States, Japan, Korea. We are living in a small planet Earth. There's no country in this world where you cannot arrive within 24 hours. Our message can be transferred within a fraction of a second to the end of the world. So that means we are just one citizen, one global citizen. Then you act differently, then you are giving very bad messages to our succeeding generation. I think we have a moral responsibility. And political leaders, they have political leadership to make this world better, where we can live sustainably with all human rights respected, rich and poor. Now, we have to really be more compassionate to those people who are really suffering. Particularly on climate change, those countries who have contributed least to the consequences of climate are being affected most. Those countries who have contributed most to the climate phenomena, they have resources. They can be much better off than those people. It's a matter of what Mary Robinson said, climate justice. This is an issue of justice. This is an issue of science. This is an issue of morality and science. So I'm really urging world leaders, particularly political leaders, they have shown good example. They should lead by example. That's my answer, as former Secretary General. I'm really appealing.
Thank you. I was really interested in what you said about Spain having a new curriculum. And Italy, having a new curriculum to require some hours on climate change and climate science, and that you're encouraging the South Korean government to do so. So, as well as the global leadership that I think President Robinson and Secretary General Bond provide, and the moral leadership, I think you've both made the case for the economic leadership as well, and that there are economic costs at so all of these climate change things that are happening are felt at the local level, right? Rich and poor, the least developed islands are obviously feeling the pinch, but also the wealthy are feeling the pinch. You mentioned Aspen. Aspen, Colorado, because of the lack of snow, has opened up its first soup kitchen in the past couple of years. And Napa Valley, another area of wealth, has also suffered devastating fires. So I think at the global level there is a moral leadership, but the effects are felt at the local level as well, and that provides this wellspring of some new ideas for what to do. I want to now open it up to the audience. I'll take 3 at a time. I would ask that since we're running out of time, that you introduce yourself very quickly and make sure to ask a question rather than a comment. So let me do woman up front in the pink, woman also in the pink, and is there another pink? Woman in the middle with the glasses. So up here first.
Hi, thank you so much for the wonderful sharing. I think we've all learned a lot about it. My name is Angel, and I'm with Hong Kong Phoenix Television. I actually used to work in the United Nations Secretariat in your last year in 2016, and I have also worked in WFP in Rome before. So my question is, it seems like everyone seems worried about climate change and nuclear weapons. And as you have said before, the government, the states seems worried. They all talk about it inside of the United Nations, but when they left, they forget about it. How do we ensure the effectiveness and efficiency of what the UN has been said, has been put into agenda can actually be achieved? How do we ensure the effectiveness and efficiency? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pink again.
Good morning, Sanjin Choi, Langham Partners. Thank you so much for lucid and succinct and straightforward remarks. My question to you, President Robinson, you mentioned about the role of central bank and financial institutions. You're absolutely right. Mark Carney has been forward thinking and the role of central bank, but I'm not sure his incoming governor, Andrew Bailey, will do the same things. But with regard to your remark on BlackRock, of course, BlackRock managed $7 trillion. However, last year when I was in BlackRock in London, and there was a huge demonstration, so perhaps it may be something changed, Larry thinks hard. But when you mentioned Norway has the largest sovereign wealth fund, managed $1 trillion. Government decided to divert some of the fundings, but not everything. And I would be interested in your views, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. You know Middle East very well. Of course, Kingdom of Saudi will host the G20. At the moment, the president of Islamic Development Bank is a former Saudi Arabia minister. And then most of the Islamic Development Bank is dealing with infrastructure funding issues. I would be interested in your views of GCC sovereign wealth funding with regard to the climate change. Thank you very much.
So your question is about the role of climate or sovereign risk funds on climate change and what they can do. Excellent. Got it. Okay. Middle, yes.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for being here. It's such an honor. My name is Rashmi. I'm a student at Harvard University. I'm very concerned about the forced displacement caused by climate change, and numbers have been thrown around 200 million by 2050. And my question has two parts. So the first is, do you think there's hope for the 1951 Refugee Convention to be amended to include climate refugees? And the second part is, what is a sustainable way in which to resettle these populations? Because a lot of countries have begun buying land in Fiji, for example, but that doesn't really seem sustainable. So what is a sustainable way in which to resettle these massive numbers of people?
So we have three questions. One is on how do we ensure the efficiency of UN-type mechanisms and how the implementation of what is agreed on at the UN. Secondly, what is the role of sovereign wealth funds and in their role in mitigating and adapting to climate change? And three, what do we do about forced displacement, which is happening now, the climate refugees, and the issue of land use? So I welcome, you don't have to answer all three, just...
The first one, yeah. Let me answer about the effectiveness of the United Nations. I have been receiving this kind of question so many times during my time. So my answer is that the UN is not the perfect one. I admit it. But at this time, that's the maximum where member states' will and commitment have been there. But that does not give us any complacency. You know, I have been very strong, very firm to make United Nations more accountable, responsible, morally, clean and effective. That's why I really try to change the administrative structures. I think a lot of changes have been made during my time, including just to make a morally clean, ethically clean UN. We have learned a lot from so-called oil for food crisis. That was a corruptive practices. Then we have not seen any such kind of very serious issues. At the same time, how to make sure that the UN staff, particularly leading staff, they should lead by example, by showing good example, not only to the staff, but also to the world, so that the UN is working, accountable way. That's what I can tell you at this time. I'm sure that my successor, Antonio Guterres, will be much more based on what I have achieved. That's what I can tell you. Let me go to number 3, refugees. There are many reasons why people become refugees. Most of them, they are driven, forced to flee their country of their home. because of imminent danger to their lives, like a conflict, as you see in Syria. I think at least 5 million people have become refugees now. We have 75 million refugees around the world. That is the number of refugees where there was only during the Second World War. During peacetime, 21st century, is impossible to understand. It's unacceptable to recognize that there are 75 million people. Why? Because of the domestic problems, they leave their country because of the conflict, because of the poverty, long spell of drought or flooding, natural disasters. There are many reasons. Now, UNHCR, which was led once by Antonio Guterres, current Secretary General, we've been mobilizing all necessary support. I have convened so many refugee support donor conference so many times, but still, clearly there is a lack of support from the member state. Instead of helping refugees, many leaders are erecting walls to prevent the refugees from entering to a safer place. I've been really speaking out that, dear leaders, please do not erect walls. Instead, you must build bridges among people instead of rejecting them. And if you reject them, where can they go? We lose a lot of children who have to die needlessly because of these problems. Therefore, again, there is a clearly moral deficiencies at this time, political moral deficiencies among the leaders. Some well-to-do European countries, they just prohibit the people from coming. And some leaders are now threatening to release refugees to other countries. This has become quite political issues. Again, this is a source of concern that I hope that, again, the US should really show a global leadership. Thank you.
President Robinson.
Okay. I wouldn't dream of attempting the first question after the Secretary General, so I'll focus on the second question, and I also want to add something to what Ban Ki-moon said about the third question on climate-displaced people and refugees. On the sovereign funds, I think the main problem now is countries are committing to be zero carbon by 2050. And the United Kingdom, for example, has actually put it into law to their great credit. But the United Kingdom is, with its export credit, funding fossil fuel elsewhere. And I gather there was a big African meeting in London the other day, and most of the investment was in fossil fuel in Africa. So that's not really very helpful. Norway has just got a big oil field that's coming on stream, and they're very proud of the fact that they're using clean energy to bring the oil on stream, and then they'll export the oil, and it won't be their problem. That's not on. We can't have that anymore. We've got to get real about this, and I think that's really very important. On the climate displaced, there's actually a good piece of news, thanks to the UN Human Rights Committee. Just the other day, there was a case of a person from Kiribati, the small island atolls of Kiribati. He was on one of the smaller atolls that went under, so he had to move to a slightly higher atoll, which was overcrowded. So he fled, basically, to New Zealand and brought a claim that he shouldn't be sent out of New Zealand because he was a climate-displaced forced person. The court, on the evidence, didn't uphold his claim, but they did uphold in law that a person who is forced to leave and cannot live because of climate conditions cannot be forced to return. That's very important. That's the beginnings of a human rights approach to, I still don't say climate refugees, I say climate displaced people because they haven't got the status of refugees. Now they've begun to get a little bit of status thanks to the Human Rights Committee, and I think we can build on that. And that's good news. And the UN has done something good.
I want to get two more. Woman in beige and gentleman in the purple shirt back there. Again, your name, affiliation, and a very brief question.
Thank you. My name is Shamini Selvaratnam, and my question is, you mentioned about all of the things that we talked about: protectionism, individualism, climate skepticism, climate denialism. These things are funded and by actors who benefit from climate inaction, from business as usual. How do we address that? Because Mary Robinson, in her 3 things that we as individuals can do, that's great, but how do we combat the active actors who are working against our collective interest?
Thank you. Oh, no. Yeah, there was a gentleman in the purple shirt in front of you. In front of you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Aristotle Vine. I'm an undergraduate at Harvard. We talked a lot about science and in the role of science in legitimizing the climate emergency. But when we talked about actually solving the problem, we mentioned the role of government and in private institutions. I'm wondering how you envision the role of science and innovation technology in allowing us to actually combat the issue as well and promote new solutions, maybe in continual, clean energies, things like that, that will allow us to promote change as well.
So I feel thank you. So I feel terrible. So please.
Rick Rybak with Just Economics. Thank you for the great presentations and insights. Question, in the United States and around the world, our development patterns are characterized by something we call suburban sprawl. And development is very spread out. It results in very energy inefficient dwellings and requires people to travel in energy efficient modes. I'm wondering what you see as a way to remedy suburban sprawl. Are there certain techniques or things that we can do so that our settlement patterns are more compact and more compatible with saving both the countryside and our cities?
Great, thank you. So we have 3 questions. One is, how do we talked about the trends on protectionism. How do we combat entrenched funded interests that are solidly on the side of the status quo? Secondly, what is the role of science and innovation? And I think the third question actually does relate to the science and innovation question, which is what do we do with development of combating sprawl, and how do we design cities? You can answer one or any of those questions.
The first question will have to be much to fostering global citizenship. We see many national leaders with just aiming for short-term gain, short-term political gains, so electoral gains. And this really hampers and really makes serious problems. A lot of leaders claim that they are global leaders. They work for the world. But in reality, almost all of them, almost without exception, they become national leaders with the small sense of global vision. European Union, they always say global vision. American leaders, most of them, except some developing countries, but the way they do is very, very disappointing. So that is why, based on my experience, then the first thing I did after my retirement is to establish a Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. Global citizen. Because I've been always feeling that this is because of lacking of global citizenship by the leaders who claim to be global leaders. I think that's the answer. It's an easy answer, but very difficult. How to teach, how to educate these people. So normally, we use such a forum like the United Nations, but I do not have any such kind of forum now. I'm just speaking out alone. But still, I am doing more for young people, just starting from young people, fostering global citizenship. That's my answer at this time. Of course, there is a clearly very important role of science. But in the other aspect, there is another some issues of how you use science and technology for proper purpose. That is what we need to really have some global governance system. Suppose AI, artificial intelligence, it can be used. There is a serious morality issues. Should human being become slaves or dictated by what machine says? No, that's not. We have to control. We have to be able to control the use of this science. When it comes to disruptive technologies, how can you make sure that these disruptive sciences are not used by terrorists or some other people who have ill motives? So there should be, again, United Nations, there is a lot of things for United Nations to do with the future technology. Maybe I'm leaving again.
On the climate skeptics, yes, there are big funders and a lot of money going into climate skeptics. And I think the advice is follow the money and challenge the large fossil fuel companies that are funding the skepticism, the bad science, etc. They're still doing it. So that's the way to address that. And you know, I served for 9 years on the European Climate Foundation, and the European Climate Foundation tracked the funding of the skepticism and the denial, the bad science. And it is millions and millions every year. And then the money to counter it is $1 million or $2 million. You know, it's far, far less. But actually, the European Climate Foundation has become more effective in addressing some of the climate denial and also making sure the good science gets well covered and gets out. And this is important. But you know, it's a tough world because the money is on the bad side. And I learned something. I mean, I'm not letting Ban Ki-moon away with the Pope. I was with the Pope as well. Anyway. I was at a second convening by the Vatican of the oil and gas heads of companies, and they were all there, including the heads of ExxonMobil, BP, Total, Shell, you name it, and the investors in the oil and gas companies. The first convening the year before had been a total failure. The Pope had not been pleased. He made a strong statement and left with no photographs, which devastated those who had come. So they were on their better behavior, and they signed up to weak agreements on carbon pricing and carbon risk disclosure, and they all signed, and then they got their photo, etc. But the point is, what really came home to me, and it's a very obvious thing, but I hadn't understood it properly, is you make billions from fossil fuel. You make millions from clean energy. So how do you go from billions to millions without disruption? So the only way we're going to get the change in the fossil fuel-led economy, which we still have, and start to bend that curve, is through disruption. It's through the work of the school children, the Extinction Rebellion, the Sunrise Movement in this country, but it's also litigation, like the Urgenda case, the other cases that are pending, the Children's Trust case in Oregon and all other cases. It's through shareholders questioning in things. It's through, most of us have bank accounts, I think. We could all challenge our banks. I have a podcast called Mothers of Invention, and the byline of the podcast is that climate change is a man-made problem and requires a feminist solution. And, you know, for the men in the room who might feel a bit uncomfortable, let me explain that man-made is generic and a feminist solution definitely includes men, and hopefully all the men in the room. And I'm doing it with a younger Irish woman who's a very successful comedian based in New York, Maeve Higgins. And Maeve rang her bank up because Chase Bank, she discovered when she learned a little bit about climate through our podcast, was very invested in fossil fuel. So the thrust of the phone call was that she wanted to withdraw her money. And the poor woman she was talking to had no idea how to deal with this, and said, well, look, you better get on to headquarters. And Maeve said very politely, yes, I'll do that. And now, tell me, I'm in New York phoning you. Where are you? And the woman said, oh, I'm in the Philippines. Oh, says Maeve, I gather climate is very difficult in the Philippines. And for the next 10 minutes, the woman talks about we can all ring our bank and, ask them about their fossil fuel. In other words, there are things you can do to make the disruption, make life more uncomfortable for those on the wrong side of all of this. So I don't want to go on for too long. Yes, I totally agree about the science and innovation. I also agree with the point that Ban Ki-moon was making. We need to be worried about when we get more urgent, which we will over the next decade. We'll get very urgent about climate because it's going to get worse and worse. And if we don't see the bending of the curve, then we'll get more urgent. And then we'll start having technical geoengineering solutions. And we have no governance at the moment of geoengineering. So that's an issue which the elders have been thinking about. And the final one on the suburban sprawl, I think, to me, that's a matter of planning regulations. And I think, the diminishing of regulations generally on water quality, on air quality that are in this country is very distressing, to be honest. And I think the planning regulations are probably in the same. I'm not an expert on that area, but it's better if you have planning. We're going to need to refit old buildings to make them energy efficient because buildings contribute hugely to emissions. Refitting old buildings that people live in is very costly, and we haven't worked out how we're going to do it. So that's a huge problem, which every country will need to think about.
We started late, so we are ending a little bit late. Thank you, all of you, for your time and your attention and your wonderful questions. Thank you, President Robinson and Secretary General Bond, for your leadership and for your vision.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.